Hello, hello, hello. So, many of you have joined me for the previous episodes. This is block 6. It is the most complicated block in the entire quilt. I apologize. And this is what we're going to be making. Now, many of you who are new to FPP will know that getting your points to match like that, people who are a little bit older in the FPP thing will know getting your points to match like that, it doesn't happen often. And when it does, we're very happy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how, if you want to do a more simple version, this is an amended block. And all I've done is, instead of doing all the little pieces that go on like that, all I've done is I've put a piece of fabric over the entire section. So you'll see on the back, you've got D1, oh, backwards here, D1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But all I've done is I've just put a little piece of yellow over that whole section. So if you want to do the simple version, that's what you do. And I'll show you how I'm doing the orange version. So like that, over here, I'm going to do an orange section of that whole piece. Exactly like we do FPP normally. You can see, well, you can just see the orange through there. You make sure that the orange goes over all your seam allowances over there. And then you put a nice big chunk of cream over there. Remember, right sides together, right side, right side. You stitch along that line and you get that finished. So I'll show you how I'm doing the simple version first, and then we'll do a little bit more complicated. Okay. So all I've done is I've stitched on that line, and now I'm going to trim this off as we go along. And hopefully, there we go. So just like we had before, I'm putting my 1/4 inch seam line along, a 1/4 inch line on there on the seam line. I'm folding that open, setting my seam, and all I've done is do that. Now you trim this down. Now when you're trimming these, because you've got such small pieces, consistency is key. In the block 5 video that I did earlier today, you would have seen me discussing how it is best to cut these blocks down. This is where I find, as long as you're consistent all the way along, it'll make your life a lot easier, because when you come to line these blocks up, it is really handy if the gap around your seam allowance on the outside is the same all the way through. Forgive me. Okay, so over here you can tell that my ruler slipped a tiny little bit. So I'm just going to go back and make sure I hold my ruler in place and just trim that tiny little piece there. You can see it was minuscule. You can barely see it. That's what I'm talking about. That is how tiny it was. But just getting that little bit of consistency all the way through makes your life that little bit easier when you come to put these together. Okay, so that's my little orange section there. And this is going to go with my yellow section. And what I'm looking to do is to make another one of those. And that together will then make that. So these two together, I'm going to stitch along. Now you would like to match these two seams there and line those up like that. That's what we're looking for. If you're a little bit out, please remember to be kind to yourself. You just want to remember, this is fun, it is a hobby. You are not, if you are a perfectionist and you want to take your time and do it, that's great. If you're not, please be kind to yourself. It's really important that you remember this is fun. I've done now is stitch along that line. Actually, that didn't turn out too badly. Got my ironing board over here. Push that a little bit out of the way. I try and set my seam each time. Now, when I do press these, I always try and press this open. In this section over here, you've got 2 layers of cream, 2 layers of orange, 2 layers of cream, 2 layers of yellow. Now, if you push that all to one side, that's a very big amount of fabric sitting in one place. So for me, I prefer pressing my seams open. I don't remove the papers at the moment. I wait until everything is put together in the quilt before I take my papers out. That's my choice. You don't have to do that. Ooh, that does not look bad. I'm very happy with that. So just like I've done with this section, I'm now going to take these two, pin them together, and I'm going to sew along this line here. So right sides together as normal. And if I have trimmed my blocks exactly the same all the way around, as you can tell over here I have, they will line up perfectly. So in theory, you should be able to stitch on this stitch line there and everything will line up and be perfect. In theory, remember, if it isn't, that is okay. This is one of the most complicated blocks that I have created in a quilt before. So just remember, if you don't get it spot on, that's okay. Maybe practice with some scrap fabric before you give it a go. And I can tell already I shifted there. You can tell I've got a little bit of overhang. So I'm not happy with that. You can tell that I've got quite a bit of a gap there. So I'm just going to unpick this only because this is the very center of my quilt and I do want it to be good. And I think the reason is my sewing machine is quite far away from me now and I wasn't paying as much attention as I could. I try not to unpick FPP, as I've said, but I know that this being the very center of my quilt, I know I would be irritated by that every time I looked at it. So for me, I'm undoing it because I know my OCD would not like that. Almost there. If you actually do ever unpick FPP, I will tell you now, pick out every thread now. It is really important because the number of times you put these together and you've got a random thread that you can't get out, it is so frustrating when you've got that little thread there for ages and ages and ages. Okay, let me try that again. Right. And I was a little bit quick with that as well. So just like before, I'm lining those up. That looks much better. Yes. So you can see that is considerably better. That point has met perfectly at the bottom, and that's what I was aiming for, to be able to do that. And again, I'm going to press my seam open. And you'll have that one, and you'll now attach these two together like that. Now when you do match it, this point here in the middle is the most important point of the whole quilt. So when you do match them, hi Ann Davies, when you do match them, you want to make sure that your seams here are nested beautifully and that you try and hit that point. Again, if you don't get it right, that's okay, but try if you can, because that is the very center point of your quilt and you want it to be as perfect as you can get it. Okay, let's go for it. If you have got a needle down option, try and use that. I think that helps tremendously. Oh, I think that's all lined up. Let's see how we go. Now I've got an enormous amount of fabric I'm going through here. Oh, well, this side is perfect. Perfect. Oh my. Well, from the back, that looks spot on. And from the front, but I'm not getting too excited yet. Get rid of my extra threads. The moment of truth. I'm going to use my little iron and press my seams open. This is where I wish I had multiple cameras that you could now watch me press this. Oh, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Oh my goodness. That is almost immaculate. I'm very pleased with that. So that's the simple version of what we are doing for our center block of block 6. Now, because I'm on Natasha tomorrow, I'm going to make sure I put this in the little bag and put the bag in the bag I'm taking to Natasha. Well, I'm on Natasha today, actually. So we've now made this one. And I've already made this one because it takes quite a while to get these done. I'm going to do part A and part B for you. Part A is my orange one, part B is my yellow one. In the pattern, the colouring and the numbering are all in this in the pattern, so you'll know what you're doing. So this is orange. So I know I need a relatively long orange piece for this piece over here. I just try and pick my fabrics out as I go along. So in this one, A1 is that first little block over there, A2, A3, A4, and A5. In some of them, this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They vary. It's just the way the program wrote it. There is no right or wrong on that. You've got to stitch all of them together at some point. So you just do them with the way the pattern is written out, and it'll show you what colors go where. So I'm doing A1 to A2. So that's going to be an orange to a light purple. So just like before, you've got the wrong side of your fabric to the wrong side of your paper, and you've got the right side of your fabric to the right side of your fabric. So this bit over here would be the wrong side, this will be the wrong side, that bit there right side, and that bit there right side. And I'm now going to stitch on the A1, A2 line between the two. Now the advantage of this, as you can see, it's a tiny little seam, so you don't have a huge amount of stitching to do. There are just, I think, 6, yep, there are 6 different parts, so 5 different seams, and there are 8 different segments in each block. So it's a reasonably large amount of stitching to do, but luckily there are small seams to do in each one. Okay, so that's A1 and A2. Now A3 is this lovely big long section over here. That's my A3, which is going from there to there. So that's where I pulled this piece out earlier, where I knew it would be big enough. And you fold that down and it's ready to go. So again, you've got your A1 we did earlier to A2, and now we've stitched onto the A3 line over there. You're going to fold everything down you want to keep, and everything over here you're going to get rid of. And we put that down there. just setting my seam and then rolling that over. So A1, A2, A3. We're now going to do A4, which is our dark purple. Or what we called purple. You'll notice my pieces of fabric that I'm stitching are a lot larger than what you would need. I've always said before, rather have your pieces too big than too small, because you can always add the fabric to your stash, but it is such a pain when you've got to unpick it and redo it all. So that's number 4. We're about to do number 5, which is another tiny bit of orange. And you can tell that the pieces that we're using are really small. You can see that that is the section over there for over there for A5. It's a tiny little section over there, but it's just one of those ones that you just add that little pop of color and it just gives you that little ping of excitement. I just love these little blocks. But they are a little fiddly. So I think that it's one of those ones you've just got to take your time with and give it a go. And if it doesn't work out, do what I did as the alternative and just do a single color. That would work really, really well. Right, so we've now done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's now just this bit of cream to do on the top. So like I've done all the way through, I fold on the stitch line so I have a rough idea where it's going. I take a large chunk of cream there, line that up with my stitch line, check I've got a 1/4 inch seam, and I then sew that down together. And then that is another one of our blades done for this block. And we've got one more blade to make, which is exactly the same as this, but with yellow where we've got orange. So I'll show you how to do that. You're doing 4 of each colorway. You'll notice I've already done 3 orange and 3 yellow, because these are all identical the way that we're putting them together. You may do them in a slightly different order, but the methodology that you're using is identical, and I didn't want to bore you senseless by showing you the same thing 8 times. I've given that a nice good press, so it doesn't quite look like anything just yet. So all I'm going to do now is trim this off, and as I mentioned with the alternate block in this, make sure you are consistent all the way along. Use the same ruler all the way through this block to make sure that you are not getting slightly different calibration by using different rulers. You've got the perfect combination of consistency and care there. I'm going to keep that piece because that bit there may very well fit one of these tiny little triangles that we need over there. And then I'm just gently nipping off the last little bits over here per the corners of the pattern. If you do want to get this pattern, you will notice that it's on the Natasha Makes website right now. That's on there for until the end of the program, and then once it's finished on the Natasha Makes website, it'll come back onto my own website, but that will be in 2023. So all I'm doing over here now is I'm just laying out the blocks that I've done to see where it's all going. And you can tell all that's missing is this little yellow section over there. So I'm sliding that out the way. This is my little yellow section. Now previously I said to you that they go in different orders. You can tell there, that is number 1, that's number 2, that's number 3, that's number 4, and that's number 5. With the A block that we just did, you'll see that it went slightly differently. It went A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You end up with exactly the same result. It's just ever so slightly different. There is no, you get exactly the same thing with this. So all I'm going to do now is find a nice long piece of yellow that will fit into that perfectly, and you can tell the yellow goes all the way along there. So I'm going to sew from number 1 to number 2. So B1 is yellow, and B2 over there is a light purple. So I'm going to put these together. I'm going to lie that down. I'm going to fold on where the stitch line should be so I know where I'm lining my fabric up to. I'm going to take a nice little piece of purple, light purple, line that up, fold back and check that I've got the right amount for seam allowances. And I moved the fabric as I moved it there. That's worked perfectly. Oops. Not quite sure what I did there. So that's the little stitch line that I've done there. I'm now going to fold this back. Everything I want to keep is going to go beneath my stitch line, and everything I want to get rid of is on this side of my ruler. I line my 1/4 inch line up with my seam line, and I just trim off the excess thread and excess fabric over there. And now I set my seam and roll that back, ready to put on a B3. And the B3 is a tiny little bit of yellow. I've done a few of these blocks already, so I've got some leftover fabrics. So I just fold on the stitch line between B2 and B3. I line my fabric up and make sure I've got enough fabric for my seam allowance. And I then stitch on the A2, A3, sorry, the B2 and B3 line there. I think it's only about 12 stitches that my machine has just done. It's a very small area that we're stitching. There are quite a few stitches. There are 5 seams in each one of these blades. So there are 40 seams just in the blades. And then obviously you have to sew the blades together and then your blocks together. So it is a reasonably big, well, it's not a big block, but it's obviously got quite a lot of seams on and quite a little bit of work in it. So just take your time. It's nice and easy. You don't really, once you get into a rhythm of it, it does actually go quite quickly. So on the B4 line, I'm just rotating this round to check I've got enough left over for seam allowances. You can tell that I've got this tiny little piece as a leftover piece. So it might not work, but it's worth kind of just having a look and seeing if you can. I think I can make that work. And if I can't, then I know I was wrong. I would never admit it to anyone else, but there we go. There we go. Fingers crossed. Folding back everything I want to keep below my seam line. Get my, oh, my rotating cutting mat came apart there. So I then make sure I pull all my thread and everything I want to get rid of onto this side of my ruler. And I just trim that off. Make sure I set my seam, roll everything back. And check that I've got that right. And I do. Now I've got quite a large bit of yellow here that I don't need, so I'm going to nip that off. And I'm going to actually try and use this little bit of yellow into the tiny little bit of yellow over here that I need in the B5 area. So I just fold on the seam line between B4 and B5. You can see I've got that little seam line there. That's where it's going to go. This little bit of yellow that I've not just cut off, I'm going to line up there, fold back my fabric, and I'm going to see if I've got enough. I've got more than enough by doing that. So all I'm going to do now is stitch on the B4, B5 line and stitch that down. And then I've only got one more seam to do for a little bit of cream at the top. And that will be the last blade that I need for the block 6 of this quilt. And that will complete all of the foundation paper piecing segments of this quilt. The next sections will be done in a normal piecing method with applique. So that will be available for you for the month of July. And you can tell that has worked really, really well. And the only thing missing now is to add a bit of cream onto the bottom over here. I've cut some cream fabric earlier. Just going to fold on where the stitch line would be. Press that down. Line up my cream where I know it's going to go. I've got to make sure my seam allowance over there. Fold it back, and you can see I've got plenty of fabric to go around my little stitched area. And our last seam for this blade. There we go. I'm just going to fold these back and then trim back all the excess that I don't need. And I'm going to just set my seam and rotate that back. Now, when I've done this, I've just noticed that little purple bit there hasn't gone all the way along. Now, what's important to do is to notice when you haven't pressed it quite right, you'll see over here, I've got a little lip. Now that lip, if I give that a little bit of a tug, you'll see that that lip of pressing is why that seam's been missed. Now, I'm not prepared to unpick that. I think it's fine. It's just one of those things that if your seam hasn't quite gone where you want it to be, you've either not stitched correctly on this line, but as you can see there I have, or when you've pressed it, you've just got that tiny little lip there. It's nothing wrong with that. There's no problem at all. It's just an important thing to look at and notice. That's why it's happened. Next time I'll try a little harder. So just don't be unkind to yourself. Let it go. It's only a seam. It's one tiny little bit that's been missed, and you'll get the next one. And I've got a few more little cuts here. Now, one thing to just notice, and you'll see I slipped again a little bit there as well. There we go. One thing to notice in my patterns over here, that I've got a funny sort of triangular corner bit there. Make sure you do nip those off, and you're keeping that consistent gap between your seam allowance and where you're cutting all the way along, because it just makes your lining up process when you try and do these blades and put them together, it just makes that alignment that little bit easier, having those triangular bits on the end when you need to marry those two up. You can see over there by having those, I've got them consistent all the way along, and you can see that they match up beautifully there. Whoops. You can see they match up perfectly there. It just makes your life that little bit easier being able to do that. So now I'm lining these up, checking I've got them the right way around, which I do. And I'm going to sew all the way down this line to take two of our blades to be a square, effectively being two half-square triangles. I do try and take it in nice and slowly at this point, because you've got so much fabric here and you've got everything all lined up perfectly. You just want everything to just ease in and go together. Brilliant. Trim off all my threads. And if you look at where it's actually stitched, that's done really, really well. And I'm going to press my seams open again, like I have with the whole block all the way through. Come on. And it's always a good indicator when you do press your seams open. You can see if you have actually hit all of your points on the other side. And I think you'll agree that looks really healthy. Now I've got my one square over here, and now obviously I need to attach those two together. So just like I did with the block in the beginning of this tutorial, you're going to do exactly the same thing. Because we've cut these and trimmed these identically all the way along, they should line up perfectly. And all we're going to do now is put these through the machine and stitch those up. Now, you need to also always remember that this FPP block is really complicated. You've got a lot of points that you're trying to line up. And if you don't quite get it right, please just be kind to yourself. It's only a block and it's meant to be fun. You're meant to enjoy this. And if you get it right, fantastic. And if you don't, fantastic. You've made something, and you've made something really beautiful and really pretty. I'm going to move my machine back a little bit while I press these seams so you can at least see something on the screen other than this machine. You do end up with quite a large bulk of fabric at this point. So just take it nice and slow. Hi Fiona, thanks so much. How can you concentrate at this time in the morning? I'm not quite sure. I'll let you know. I don't feel like I'm getting there. Hi Linda, hi Anne. And there we go. And I have to admit, I'm quite astonished that I got those to line up quite so well when it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm supposed to be on Natasha in a few hours. So the last one we're going to do is this on here. Now this is going to be a complicated one because you've got a large, you can just tell how much you're trying to line up there. So all I'm going to say again, be kind to yourself. If you get it right, fantastic. And if you don't, fantastic. You've done a brilliant job because you've tried, you've given it a go. I'm going to drag this towards me. I'm going to put my nose right up to the machine and hopefully manage to get this perfect. Come on. I think it's always important to always speak to your machine as well. Encourage her along. My little machine is called Bertha. I think giving your machine a name doesn't make you sound, makes you sound a little less crazy when you're having a moment with your machine that you can call it by a name. People think you're fighting with a person rather than an inanimate object. You don't sound quite so insane. Please let this work. Please let this work. Now I can see already I've gone a little bit further over here than I would have liked. You can tell that I've got a tiny little bit of overhang there, but not too shabby. In fact, I have missed that central seam, but I'm going to be kind to myself and just go, oh well, that's all right. I'm not unpicking it. I think when you get this much fabric in one place, if you do start unpicking at this point, it can really cause problems. So I'm just going to accept that that didn't work and move on. Well, it did work because it's still a beautiful block. But you have got a colossal amount of fabric in the middle meeting there. You can see it is still very pretty, but if you look at the back, you can see that enormous amount of fabric there, and you've got paper. And actually, if I pull that open, it's not far off, it's only 1 millimeter. And if I hold it here, you can't really tell, but it is a very, very special little block. It's the most complex block in this quilt, and I've done it. It's here, it's ready, and I mustn't forget to put it in my little bag to take to Natasha tomorrow. And you can tell, even both of them are pretty, both of them will work. This one is much easier to do, obviously. This one's much more complicated, and if you don't get it right, that's okay. But how awesome are they? That is block 6 of the Summer Quilt by John Morgan, and I'm so pleased that you joined me this evening, or this morning. Thank you very much. Look after yourselves, and I will catch up with you soon. Fiona, that's very kind. Thank you so much. Fiona just said that that block looks beautiful. Have a wonderful evening, all of you. Sleep well. Good night, and I'll catch up with you later in the week. Bye-bye.